Now, Lord, may the words of my mouth be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our rock and our redeemer. Amen. Amen. Well, it's good to be back with you this Sunday here back in Etna. We have been going through a series called The Way of the Kingdom, and we got all the way to the end of chapter 6. But there's some other things that we need to talk about together. So we're going to put that series on hold. We still have all of chapter 7 to do. So we will come back to chapter 7 of that Sermon on the Mount. But today, as we're approaching Vision Weekend, there are just some things I'd like to share with you. Some things that are that they're going to be themes that come back in Vision Weekend. So I've called this series Overture. An overture is kind of like a preview of everything to come in a particular piece of work. So that's what this is. The next 3 Sundays, we're going to be looking at 3 specific things that we're not specifically going to talk about in Vision Weekend, but they're kind of like central pieces to not only Vision Weekend, but truly what it means to be the people of God. Psalm 84 is an amazing psalm. There's a few things that we need to understand. We'll be in Psalm 84 the next 3 Sundays. This is a psalm that was sung by a group of people who were on a journey together. They were leaving the places that they all came from. They met up somewhere along the way, and they were all headed to Jerusalem. And as they walked together, they would do this at least once a year, sometimes twice a year. This is probably a song they sang about this time of year as they went to Jerusalem towards the end of the harvest season. They sang a lot of songs, and this is one of the songs they sang. I want you to imagine, as we read this psalm and talk about it, a chorus of people singing these words together. Now, there's something that you'll notice as we go through this. There's an undertone to this all, a singular passion, if you will. This singular passion has always been the center of the authentic life of faith. But this singular passion is always at war with 1,000 lesser things. When this passion that we find in Psalm 84, when it's restored to us, everything else falls into its rightful place. We begin to discover life and love and belonging and adventure as it was all meant to be from the day of creation, from the day of your creation. You were made to know and love God. Augustine said this: our hearts are restless until they find their rest in thee. Every human person on the face of the earth was made to know and love God. That's one of the most foundational points that you and I can begin from. Every human person on the face of this earth was made to know and love God. It's not just like an option on the table for those who feel like being religious. We were all created by one true God, and he desires for us to know and love him. Not in like a far off, phony religious way, and not in a self-serving, self-centered, I made my own DIY spirituality kind of way, in a way where he himself becomes our greatest passion. It's in the rediscovery of that passion that will reorient our lives and reignite the embers of faith in our heart. And that reignition, it puts us on the path of becoming exactly who we were created to be. This singular passion, not for the things of God, but for God himself. Let me read these verses again from Psalm 84. How lovely is your dwelling place, Lord of armies. I long and yearn for the courts of the Lord. My heart and flesh cry out for the living God. Even a sparrow finds a home, and a swallow a nest for herself, where she places her young. Near your altars, Lord of armies, my King and my God. How happy are those who reside in your house, who praise you continually. Just want to walk through those one by one for a minute. It begins with how lovely is your dwelling place. Oh, Lord of armies. What's that word, Lord of armies? This isn't like to say, oh, here comes God on a war horse. This is the greatest king ever. Sovereign, his power is unmatchless in all of creation. This is what the psalmist is saying. How lovely is your dwelling place. Why? Because that's where you are. Verse 2 says, I long and yearn for the courts of the Lord. My heart and my flesh cry out. There's a hymn that I grew up singing. Maybe I've mentioned this before. I don't think we've sung it here yet. As the deer pants for the water. Do you know that old song? As the deer panteth for, you got to sing it in King James. The water, it comes from Psalm 91. As the deer pants for the water, so my soul longs for you, O Lord. Just think about that for a second. The psalmist is saying, like a thirsty animal, I want you, God. I don't want all this other stuff. I don't need the bells and the whistles and the frills. I just want you, God. Like an animal needs water, I need you. I long and yearn for the courts of the Lord. My heart and my flesh cry out for the living God, not the idea of God, not the religiosity that has God involved in it. No, my heart and my flesh cry out for the living God. He's alive and he made me and he loves me and I want him in my life. I want my whole life to be about him. Verse 3 says, basically, I'm jealous of the birds. Last week we looked at what Jesus said about the birds. Don't worry about your life, right? What you're going to eat. That your heavenly Father knows he takes care of even the sparrows. Surely he's watching you too. And here we are again compared to birds. The psalmist says, I'm jealous because they just get to be in that place. Her and her children are near you, my King and my God. And verse 4, blessed or happy are those who live in your house, always singing your praises. Now, I read that a lot in my life, and I thought, I don't know about that one. Who wants to be in an eternity-long church service? You all can barely last an hour on a Sunday. Why would we want to? I'm just kidding. Why? Kind of. Why would we want to be in an eternal church service? That's not what this is, what he's saying. Happy are those, or blessed are those who dwell in your house, ever singing your praise. It's to be in the place where he is, to have that freedom of relationship where we could just burst into song at any given point, where you could just break out and dance at any given point and not feel like a fool, but I'm doing this for you, God. Just a place where there's so much freedom and love and joy. Yeah, I kind of want to be there for eternity. You don't have to look at me when I'm turning circles and trying to dance or whatever. You can do your own thing. The idea is that I just want to be where he is. And I just want to be in that place where I know there's absolute ultimate freedom, the freedom for which I was created. Psalm 90 echoes this from thinking back on Israel's journey up until that point. It says, you have been our dwelling place from generation to generation, God. It's been you. My home is in you, God. This is the heartbeat that's coming through, that's being expressed here. And this has always been the heartbeat of living authentic faith. We might be tempted to think that this isn't really possible, that's really nice and spiritual and a big sounding thing. I'm trying to tell you this morning that this is actually not only possible, it's what you and I are called to find this passion about God himself for our personal lives, that he would be the singular passion and the great center from which we were made to experience life. He himself. You were made to experience life from that center. Psalm 16, and lots of Psalms this morning. I think I got this one up here. The psalmist says, you reveal the path of life to me. In your presence is abundant joy. At your right hand are eternal pleasures. What? Just read that again. Look at the text again. You revealed to me the path of life. In your presence is abundant joy, or fullness of joy. At your right hand are eternal pleasures. you and I were made to experience fullness of joy. Now, I know that tend to be very reserved. Sometimes I think New England is a little bit more reserved than the Netherlands and European, where at the end of a sermon, I've given that example before. Never mind. Sometimes it's hard to read the room. Yeah, I don't know. Anyone not from here feel the same way I'm feeling? No, you're all from here. I'm all alone. All right. Sometimes it's hard to read the room. Sometimes joy is like, I'm saying fullness of joy is more like, yes, wow. In your presence, there is fullness of joy. I can laugh out loud and long and never feel like it's enough if I'm with you, God, because you created me and you didn't create me to be sad. So if I'm not sad, if there's no sadness anymore in the world, what am I going to be? I'm going to be happy. There's nothing that's going to temper my happiness or my joy anymore. Untempered, unfiltered, unfettered happiness, joy. This is what he created us for. And the psalmist sees this and he says, hey, I don't feel this way all the time, but I get it. I get that in your presence, there's no sadness, nothing that brings joy down. So in your presence, there's always fullness of joy. The tank's never on E. It's always full. And you were made to experience that fullness of joy. You were made for God. You were made to be with him at the center of your life. You were made for that fullness of joy. And he says, at your right hand are eternal pleasures. You were made, and listen, we get this idea about religion sometimes that it's all about being serious and not doing a bunch of stuff. All the thou shalt nots. The psalmist has it very clear. No, at your right hand from you come true and lasting pleasures forevermore. The kind of stuff that in my soul I long for. I try to fill up that space with other things, but the true stuff, the real stuff, comes from you. Where is it all found? In his presence. In his presence is fullness of joy. And by his hand is our pleasures forevermore. And this is not a path of life. The psalmist says this is the path of life laid out for all humanity, the pathway leading us into everything for which we were created. And it's a pathway that starts the minute we step into the God-centered life. And that's what this is all about. God-centeredness. That's what why did these people get up and go on their journey? Because they wanted to be with him. Why did they write these songs about him? Because their heart cried out for him. There was no other king on the throne in their hearts, if you will. It was God alone. And the scriptures continually call you and I to let God be the center of our lives, not the added component, but the absolute center. And listen, we grow in God's centeredness one step at a time. I have another little visual for you. I'll be honest with you, I did not test this out ahead of time, so we'll see how this goes. Someone gave me the idea last week and reminded me of this. I'm sorry if this vase is something special to someone. I just found it. So the psalmist is saying to us, it's coming out of this, everything's being written out of this extreme God-centeredness. There's this thing about the big rock. Has anyone ever seen this presentation, this kind of example? It's such a really key thing to understand. So I can, let me do it this way first. Now, here's the big rock, and let's say that this is God in our lives. This base represents our lives, and here's God. Now, the way it usually works is we have a whole bunch of other things. I'm going to try to do this without breaking the glass. I have a bunch of little rocks, okay? All right. So there's all the things in our lives. There's, our mortgage payments. There's our soccer games with the kids. There's vacation. Somewhere in there. Yeah, there's work. There's my dream job. Here's my real job. Here's my dream job. it's filled with all these things, all of our ambitions, all of our ideas about the way life should be. Oh yeah, God. All right, so, and that tends to be about how it goes. Now, maybe we're like, I got to make room 1 hour on Sunday. Okay. There, somehow it just doesn't seem to fit. And yet this is how most of us tend to approach, whether or not we think this is right or wrong. And granted, you see it like this, like, maybe this is not the best way of going about this. But this is how we tend to do it. So let me demonstrate what the psalmist is saying. Made sure to find something that made a lot of noise. So the psalmist is saying the whole scriptures call us to a God-centered life where the big rock goes first, where God himself is first and center in all of our lives. And that so much so that we say, what job should I do? Well, how did God make me? What are the gifts and talents he's given me? How should I raise my kids? Well, what do the scriptures say about that? God, help me to find the way. And we begin with the God-centered life. We begin to build our lives the way we were created to build them. And then everything fits. I didn't leave any rocks in here. That really does. And so when the big rock is in place, all the little rocks fall perfectly into place. And it fits. And it fits better. When God is center, when he is first, our lives take on a whole new meaning, a whole new picture. And we're not just adding God to the things that we do. All of those other things, they actually don't go away, do they? No, they just become built upon the rock himself. And this is what the psalmist is calling us to a God-centered life. And we grow in that one step at a time. This will affect everything about our lives. It will affect the way you sing. I know I'm talking a lot about singing and joy, but I'm telling you, it's going to touch the way you sing. You're going to hear a song on the radio and you're going to think, wow, that really connects to my heart. Or you're going to play it on iTunes or wherever you listen to music. It's going to affect the way we sing together. As our lives take on more of this shape, when we come together and sing, it's going to affect our lives, or it's going to affect our singing. You're going to hear it. It's going to affect the way we do things together as a church. We're not going to start thinking, well, I want to do things the way I like, or I want to do things the way I used to do it. Or we're not going to start thinking about, what's a nice churchy thing to do? Not that anyone here would actually think that, but these are the things that happen to us when we get into this like mode of playing church. But when we get to the God-centered life, we realize, wow, God has changed my life. What can we do together? Well, we can put out the welcome mat so that as many people as possible can find their dwelling place in God, can find their home like I have found my home in him. We realize when this is in place that we become physical manifestations of the Father running out to meet the prodigal son while the prodigal son was making his way home. Who are the feet and the arms that are going to run out and reach out to those who are trying to find their way home? Well, that's you and me, but we only get that when we get this, that we are, 2 Corinthians 6 says, we are, God is making his appeal, not from the moon, not from rock formations. God is making his appeal through us. And this gets that because our lives are built on him and him alone. He is the center of our lives. It shapes the way we approach our career. I met a man, he was here traveling briefly. I just met him last week. He's from Ireland. And he is, we got to talking. We were just talking and we knew each other were Christians. So we're talking about just things in our lives, our faith journey. And he asked me what I do. I told him, I asked him what he did. And he said, oh, I'm a lawyer. Now I could have pegged this guy for a pastor, but he's a lawyer. And actually, he's not just a lawyer. He's a lawyer in a very high court in Ireland. And he just starts talking about his job as if it were a ministry. as if it was something that God gave him to do something with in his life, to do something meaningful. He loves the work that he does, and he sees that as God working through him, but he also is leveraging opportunities. He sits down with like leaders of countries in one-on-one conversations, and he starts the faith conversation. Hey, just as natural as it can, he gets access that you and I would never have access to these people. Their security forces probably wouldn't even let us in the same room with them. And he's in there talking to them about who Jesus is. And this is what the God-centered life sees. It doesn't see, oh, my career, and I'll put God somewhere on the top. It sees, no, everything is from him. And I came from him and I'm going to him. I'm just passing through right now. God has to be first. And when we realize that, sometimes the process of getting the big rock first is a process, just like I did, of getting all the little rocks out of the way first. You have to remove a lot of the little rocks to get the big rock into place. And it's a step-by-step process. But this sees that God is truly the center and should be the center. So I want to give you something to think about and something to pray about. I've started putting this in the back of the bulletins under the notes section. Every week there'll be 2 questions, just something to think about and something to pray about. And we're going to head into a time of reflection here in just a moment. But I want to draw your attention to these questions. Most of the time I won't, but today I do. I want you to think, on a scale of 1 to 10, how God-centered do you feel like your life has been lately? On a scale of 1 to 10, how God-centered do you feel like your life has been lately? Maybe you say, you know what? I'm at a 0 because I'm not even sure I buy all this stuff. Great, you're at a 0. Like, thanks for being honest. I'm at 0. Maybe you say, you know what? I'm at a 6 maybe because I know all this stuff, but I feel like I haven't grown in a long time. Okay, you're at a 6. That's great. So think to yourself, on a scale of 1 to 10, how God-centered do I feel like my life has been lately? And the second is this: no matter where you are on that line, 0, 6, anything in between, anything past, no matter where you are, how could you take one more step closer to God? What's the next step? If growing in God-centeredness is a process of removing the little rocks and getting God into the right place, what's the next step? And here's the thing, that's what I'm here for. If you don't know, I don't know what the next step would be. I'm not even sure what number I would give myself. Talk to me. And I mean that in the most literal sense possible. Like, come and talk to me, whether it's at the church. Listen, I'm serious about it. Here's my cell phone number. Here's my email address. Let's talk about this, because I really do believe that we are never more fully at rest until we find our rest in him. We will not know true joy until we find our joy in him. And if we begin there with God-centeredness, everything else will fall into its proper place. I want to pray for you, and then we're going to take a few minutes to just reflect and respond. We'll take a minute to reflect and respond. And Kay, if you could, during that moment, if you would play something. But let me pray. Lord, I do thank you that you are one whom we can love, that you aren't an impersonal force somewhere, that you aren't an idea, you are a person. You are the God who made us. We didn't make ourselves. You are the God who time and time again has poured out yourself for us. And even though we've turned away so many times, you keep coming to us and inviting us home, inviting us to find our home in you. Lord, I pray for my friends here this morning. I pray that you'd help each of us to find our home in you, to find what God-centeredness really looks like in our lives. In Christ's name.